Hi, I'm Rebecca Alcantara, and I'm going to be talking about zoobotany in this video. I'm a biology student at UVA-Wise, and one of my research projects was based around zoobotany, so it's a topic I'm pretty interested in. Alright, so what is zoobotany? Zoobotany is a field of biology that examines how plants and animals interact. Now we can see typical examples of how animals helping plants through pollination, and plants helping animals by being primary food source. The coevolution of plants and animals is a process by which an organism evolves in response to another organism's evolution. So it examines the relationship between two species and how their relationships have become intertwined over time. This process can lead to one or both species becoming dependent on the other. This dependency is most notably observed in symbiotic relationships. So there are three main categories of symbiotic relationships. The first one is mutualism. This is when both of the two organisms benefit from each other. As you can see here, pollination is a good example of mutualism, since the bees get nectar from the flower and the flower is pollinated by the bee so it can reproduce. Parasitism is the next main symbiotic relationship. This is when one organism is harmed while the other one benefits. A good example of this one is a tick benefiting from latching onto a dog, and of course the dog is harmed in this process. And the last main example is commensalism. This is when one organism is unaffected but the other one benefits. And of course a famous example of this is certain fish species using sea anemones for protection while the sea anemone remains unaffected. So, gall wasps and oak trees are an interesting example that is somewhere between commensalism and parasitism. Galls are the things on the right here, and they're made of plant tissue. They form when gall wasps inject a chemical that causes interference with the plant's normal cell growth. The adult gall wasp lays its egg in the expanded tree buds and the leaves during the spring. Larvae then feed, pupate, and emerge from the gall as adult wasps. Now, of course, the tree, individual branches or leaves may be affected. However, the overall tree is typically fine and will survive. So that's why it's somewhere in between commensalism and parasitism. So, pollination is a process that can rely heavily on the help of animals. This is because many plants are solely reliant on insects, birds, and bats for survival. This chart down here shows plants that are entirely reliant on pollination down at the bottom in the red. And as it goes up, pollinators are less essential to these plants. However, the vast majority of plants rely on pollinators in some sense. One way plants help animals is through zoopharmacognosy. Zoopharmacognosy is how animals self-medicate with plants. This image shows a horse self-medicating with tyranka, which is a thorny vine that is not typically part of their diet. This plant is found to have anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and diuretic, antibacterial, and coronary vascular properties. The horse went out of its way to seek out this plant. It doesn't normally eat, likely in means of self-medication. Another well-known example is, of course, dogs and cats eating grass. Studies of wild carnivores studies of wild carnivores found that they regularly eat non-digestible grass and other vegetation in order to punch parasitic worms from their systems. Similarly, cats regularly eat grass to stimulate muscle activity in their digestive tracts and force the parasites from their guts as well. This is likely an instinctual trait passed down from their ancestors rather than behavioral self-medication. Next, we have woolly worms eating poison hemlock. Woolly bear caterpillars are target for the tachinid fly, which lays its eggs inside the caterpillars. Once caterpillars are parasitized, they change their diet, preferring poison hemlock over um, regular lupine, um, which increases their survival rate compared to captive infected caterpillars without access to poison hemlock. This again is likely an instinctual trait rather than a behavioral one. Another example is how starlings use wild carrots in their nests. Wild carrots contain steroid compounds that repels mites, inhibit mite-laying abilities, and reduces the emergence of mite larvae. Researchers found that baby birds that live in herb-lined nests compared to grass-lined nests weighed more and were more likely to survive the second year. So this may be a combination of instinctual and learned behavior. It may also be instinctual to create a nest to protect the baby birds, but different birds have different variations of this method. For example, a very clearly learned behavior is some birds will collect cigarette butts to put in their nest because the nicotine in it just also happens to be good at repelling mites, which again will help the baby bird survive. So what are instinctive versus learned behaviors? Instinctual behaviors provide a genetic blueprint that ensures the survival and reproduction of organisms, essentially meaning we don't have to think about the behaviors. On the other hand, learned behaviors allows for adaptation, flexibility, optimization of responses based on experience and environmental cues. So these are things we've learned over time and aren't born knowing. These next couple slides will have more learned behavior examples of zoopharmacognosy. Chimpanzees use medicinal plants in a unique way to expel their parasites. They take leaves with a coarse sandpaper-like texture and roll them up into a ball. They then swallow these leaves whole, and it's able to scrape out the parasites in their intestines. Different populations use different leaves, however, most seem to have anti-parasitic and anti-inflammatory properties that may help internally heal them as well. This is another interesting example of learned behavior. Pregnant elephants will travel several miles out of their typical range to find leaves from specific trees that have abortive properties. These abortive properties will help induce labor and help the elephants give birth. And something really fascinating is that local communities have observed this behavior and learned the same plant will help women induce labor as well. This leads us to why zoopharmacognosy is important to us. From the last example with the elephants, we can see that we can learn a lot from observing animals and how they interact with plants. Wildlife and environmental conservation efforts are important to continue this research in this field. Preserving the environment and animal residents would be important if we're going to try and find new chemical components for use in human medicines. Um, Overall, in conclusion, animals and plants interact in many different ways, and from observing them, we can discover new ways to solve similar issues we face.